The day I found out what my son-in-law had done, I was sitting in my favorite chair on the porch. It was one of those perfect October afternoons. In New Hampshire, the kind where the maple trees look like they've been dipped in liquid gold and the air has that crisp bite that makes you feel more alive. I'd been living in the same colonial-style house for 42 years. Paid it off 15 years ago after working double shifts at the steel mill for decades. My late wife Martha and I had raised our daughter here, and I'd stayed after Martha passed from cancer 8 years ago. This house and my impeccable credit score were about the only things I had left that I truly valued. That and my relationship with my daughter Ellie. The mail truck pulled up, and I walked down to collect the day's delivery from my mailbox at the end of the driveway. Bills, advertisements, and a thick envelope from Northeast Credit Union that I wasn't expecting. I sliced it open with my thumb as I walked back up the gravel path, and by the time I reached my porch steps, my hands were shaking. It was a loan statement for $92, $743 in my name, for a Tesla Model Y. I don't drive a Tesla. I drive a 10-year-old Ford F-150 that I've maintained meticulously since I bought it used. The truck still runs perfectly, and I've never seen the need for anything fancier, especially now some electric car that costs nearly $100,000. I sat down heavily on my porch swing, the wood creaking beneath me as my mind raced through possibilities. Identity theft? Some kind of clerical error? Then I saw the delivery address listed for the vehicle, 247 Brookside Avenue. My son-in-law, Bradley, and my daughter's address. My throat went dry. Bradley had been driving a new Tesla for the past 3 months. He made a big show of it when they came for Sunday dinner, talking about how he'd finally made it with his real estate business and could afford his dream car. I nodded politely, though I never much cared for Bradley's obsession with status symbols. Martha had always said I was too judgmental of him, that I should give the boy a chance. So I tried, for Ellie's sake. Now, staring at this paper, a cold feeling spread through my chest. This wasn't some mistake. Bradley had somehow taken out a loan in my name using my credit, my reputation that I'd spent a lifetime building to buy himself that car. And he'd been looking me in the eye every Sunday, eating my pot roast, drinking my whiskey, all while knowing what he'd done. I picked up my phone with fingers that felt numb and called the credit union. After 20 minutes of security questions and being transferred to the fraud department, my worst fears were confirmed. The loan had been processed 3 months ago. The application had all my information: social security number, date of birth, employment history. The signature on the digital application looked like mine, but I knew I hadn't signed it. Someone had forged it. Bradley, sir, if you didn't authorize this loan, you should file a police report immediately. The woman on the phone said, "This is a clear case of identity theft." "Thank you," I said mechanically and hung up. Identity theft by my daughter's husband, my son-in-law, the father of my grandchildren. I sat there as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my yard. The trees that had looked so beautiful just an hour ago now seemed to be on fire, burning with the same rage that was building inside me. I thought about calling Ellie right away, but something held me back. I needed to understand exactly what had happened first, how deep this betrayal went. Instead, I called my old friend Richard, who had retired from his law practice last year but still kept his license active. "Jack," he said warmly when he picked up. "How are you doing, buddy?" "Not good, Rich," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "I need some legal advice. Can I come by tomorrow?" "Of course," he said, his tone immediately shifting to concern. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said simply, "but I'm going to make sure it will be." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about Bradley. He'd always been charming to charming, in my opinion. He'd swept Ellie off her feet when she was just 25, fresh out of her master's program. He was 35 then, already on his second career after a failed attempt at professional golf. He'd moved into real estate, talking a big game about luxury properties and wealthy clients. But in the 6 years they'd been married, I'd never seen much evidence of his success. They lived in a nice enough house, but nothing spectacular, and Ellie had kept working as a high school English teacher even after the kids came along. I'd offered to help them with a down payment when they were house hunting, but Bradley had refused, saying he wanted to make his own way. I'd respected that, even if I thought it was hard on Ellie. Now I wondered if pride had had nothing to do with it. Maybe he just hadn't wanted me looking closely at their finances at 5:30 a.m. I gave up on sleep and made myself a pot of coffee as the machine gurgled. I pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. I needed to understand the full extent of the damage, and I needed to be smart about how I handled this. Bradley had shown he was willing to commit a felony identity theft carried serious penalties. I had no idea what else he might be capable of. I wrote down what I knew. Bradley had somehow accessed my personal information, forged my signature, and taken out a massive loan. He was making payments on it, for now the statement showed the account was current. But what would happen if he stopped? My credit would be ruined. The bank could come after my house, my savings, everything I'd worked for. Then I wrote down what I didn't know. Did Ellie know about this? Had she been part of it? The thought made me sick to my stomach, but I had to consider it. Was this the first time? Or had there been other loans, other accounts? How had he gotten my information? I kept my important documents in a fireproof safe in my bedroom. But Ellie had the combination. I'd given it to her after Martha died, just in case anything happened to me. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. I would gather information quietly, document everything, and then decide how to proceed. I wouldn't confront Bradley yet. I wouldn't tell Ellie, not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. First step, I needed to check my credit report. I drove to the library when it opened at 9 a.m. I wasn't comfortable doing this on my home computer. I'd never been great with technology, and I didn't want to risk making some mistake that would tip Bradley off. The friendly librarian helped me access the free credit report website, and I printed out the results. What I saw made my heart sink even further. There wasn't just a Tesla loan. There was a credit card opened in my name 6 months ago with a $30,000 limit. It was nearly maxed out. The charges were for restaurants I'd never been to, stores I'd never shopped at, even airline tickets to Las Vegas. There was also a personal line of credit for $25, zero that had been fully drawn down. In total, there was nearly $150, zero of debt in my name that I hadn't created. My credit score, which had been over 800 for as long as I could remember, was now in the low 600s. I carefully folded the papers and put them in an envelope. Then I drove to Richard's house, a colonial similar to mine, but larger, set back on 2 acres of wooded land. Richard listened patiently as I laid out what I discovered, his face growing increasingly grim. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather office chair and sighed. "Jack, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. What Bradley has done is a serious crime. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. He could be looking at significant jail time. I don't necessarily want him in jail," I said, surprising myself with the realization as I spoke. He's still my grandchildren's father, but I want this made right, and I want to make sure he can never do anything like this again. Richard nodded thoughtfully. There are a few ways we can approach this. The most straightforward is to file a police report, then work with the credit bureaus and lenders to remove the fraudulent accounts from your record. The lenders will go after Bradley, and he'll likely face criminal charges. What are the other options? I asked. We could try to handle this privately, confront Bradley, the man, and he pay everything off and transfer the Tesla loan to his name. The problem is, based on what you've told me, I'm not sure he has the means to make this right. And if he's willing to steal from his father-in-law, I wouldn't trust him to honor any private agreement. I nodded slowly. What would you do if you were me? Richard was quiet for a long moment. I gathered more information before making any decisions. Find out exactly how he did this, whether your daughter was involved, and if there are any other accounts you don't know about yet. Knowledge is power, Jack. The more you know, the better position you'll be in to decide how to proceed. That seemed right to me. How do I do that? Start by securing your personal information. Change the combination on your safe. Check your mail carefully. He might have redirected some of it. Get a credit monitoring service. Then you might want to do some discreet investigating. Does Bradley handle the finances in their household? Or does Ellie? I'm not sure. I admitted, Ellie and I don't talk about money much. Martha always handled our finances when she was alive. After she passed, I had to learn it all from scratch. Find a reason to talk to Ellie about money. Something innocent. Maybe you're updating your will or considering a major purchase. See what she says about their situation. Her reactions might tell you if she's aware of what Bradley's been doing. I left Richard's house with a plan and a heavy heart. The thought of investigating my own daughter made me feel ill, but I needed to know if she was part of this betrayal. The next day was Thursday, and I knew Ellie usually took the kids to the library for story time that morning. I called her and suggested meeting for coffee afterward. She sounded pleased, if a bit surprised we didn't often meet up during the week. We sat at a small table in the corner of the local coffee shop, my granddaughter Emma coloring quietly beside us while my grandson James slept in his stroller. "So, what's the occasion, Dad?" Ellie asked, stirring her latte. "Not that I'm complaining about seeing you," I forced a smile. "Just been thinking about the future. You know, at my age, you start to consider these things more seriously. Dad, you're only 67 and you're healthier than I am," she said with a laugh. "Still, I've been thinking about my will, making sure everything's in order for you and the kids." I paused, watching her face carefully. "I want to make sure you're taken care of, especially financially." A slight shadow crossed her face. "We're fine, Dad. You don't need to worry about us. Bradley's business is doing well." Then, that new Tesla must have been a big purchase. She glanced down at her coffee. "The business has its ups and downs. You know how real estate can be, but we manage. And the Tesla, that must have been exciting for him." "Yeah, he's been wanting one forever." "Listen, Dad, I appreciate your concern, but we really are okay. Bradley would be embarrassed if he knew I was discussing our finances." Her discomfort was obvious, but I couldn't tell if it was because she knew about the fraud or because money was genuinely a difficult subject for them. I decided to push a little further. "You know you can always come to me if you need help, right? No judgment. Your mother and I had our tough times too." Her eyes welled up suddenly, and she looked away. "I know, Dad. Thank you." We changed the subject after that, talking about Emma's upcoming school play and James's new tooth. But the brief conversation had given me something to think about. Ellie was uncomfortable talking about money, and specifically about Bradley's Tesla. It wasn't proof she knew about the fraud, but it was certainly a red flag. That Sunday, Bradley and Ellie brought the kids over for our usual dinner. I'd spent the intervening days securing my personal information as Richard had suggested. I changed the combination on my safe, set up credit monitoring, and put a freeze on my credit to prevent any new accounts from being opened. I watched Bradley carefully as he strutted around my kitchen, helping himself to a beer from my fridge. He was tall and fit, with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of things going his way. His golf shirt probably cost more than my entire outfit, and his watch, which he made sure was visible whenever he gestured, was clearly expensive. "How's business, Bradley?" I asked casually as we sat down to eat. "Booming," he said with a wide smile. "Just closed on a $2.5 million property last week. Commission check should be sweet." "That's wonderful," I said, passing the mashed potatoes to Ellie. "You must be doing very well to afford that new Tesla. Those aren't cheap. You work hard. You get rewarded," he said with a wink. "That's the American way, right, Jack?" "Indeed it is," I said, meeting his eyes steadily, though sometimes people try to take shortcuts. A flicker of something uncertainty, wariness, crossed his face, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "No shortcuts in my business," he said. "Just hustle and knowing the right people." Later, while Ellie was bathing the kids upstairs using the old plastic tub I kept from her childhood, I found myself alone with Bradley in the living room. He was scrolling through his phone, probably checking sports scores or stock prices, anything to look important. "Bradley," I said quietly, "I've been meaning to ask you something." He looked up, that practiced smile already in place. "What's up, Jack? How does the financing work on a Tesla? I've heard they have some unique programs." If he was suspicious of my question, he didn't show it. Instead, he launched into an explanation about how he'd gotten a great deal through his connections, how the tax credits made it a no-brainer, how the low interest rate meant it was practically paying for itself. All lies, of course. I knew exactly how he'd financed it with my stolen identity. "Sounds like you've got it all figured out," I said when he finished. "Always do," he replied with that smug grin that I now wanted to smack off his face. For the next 2 weeks, I continued my investigation. I requested statements for all the fraudulent accounts, having them sent to a P.O. box I rented specifically for this purpose. I documented every charge, every payment, building a complete picture of Bradley's fraud. The credit card statements told a story of a man living far beyond his means, expensive restaurants, designer clothes, weekend trips to Atlantic City. The personal loan had been withdrawn in cash the same day it was approved, no way to trace where that money had gone. I also discreetly asked around about Bradley's real estate business. My neighbor's son worked for a competing agency, and over a beer, he confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. Bradley hadn't closed a significant deal in over a year. The market had turned, and many agents were struggling. But there were also rumors that Bradley had mishandled a client's earnest money deposit, and word had gotten around. By the time I met with Richard again, I had a thick folder of evidence and a clearer picture of what I was dealing with. Bradley was a fraud in every sense of the word. His successful real estate career was largely fictitious, and he'd been using my credit to maintain the illusion of success. "What about Ellie?" Richard asked as he reviewed the documents I'd brought. "Any indication she's involved?" I shook my head. "I don't think so. Based on the timing of the accounts and what I know about their schedules, he could have easily accessed my safe when Ellie brought the kids to visit. She often takes them upstairs to play in her old room, and I sometimes nap on those afternoons. Bradley usually begs off, saying he has calls to make. He could have gone into my bedroom, opened the safe, taken photos of my documents, and I would never have known." "So what do you want to do?" Richard asked. "You have enough evidence here to file criminal charges. He'd likely do time for this." I had thought long and hard about this question in the sleepless nights of the past weeks. I want justice, but I don't want to destroy my daughter's life in the process. And I don't want my grandchildren to have to visit their father in prison. Richard nodded. "I understand. But Jack, you have to protect yourself. If you don't report this fraud, you could be held responsible for these debts." "I know. That's why I've come up with a plan. But I'll need your help." I outlined what I had in mind. It wasn't simple, and it would require patience. But if it worked, I would be protected, Bradley would face consequences, and Ellie and the children would be spared the worst of the fallout. Richard listened, occasionally asking questions or suggesting refinements. When I finished, he sat back and studied me with new respect. "It's risky," he said finally, "but it could work, and it's more merciful than Bradley deserves." "It's not about what he deserves," I said. "It's about what's right for everyone involved." The next step was the hardest. I needed to confront Bradley, but in a controlled way that would serve my larger plan. I decided to do it at my house, on my territory, and I would record the conversation. New Hampshire was a one-party consent state for recordings, Richard had confirmed, so it would be legal. I invited Bradley over on the pretext of discussing some investment opportunities. I suggested he come alone, saying it would be man-to-man financial talk that would bore Ellie. His eagerness to discuss money with me, the father-in-law he'd been stealing from, showed either tremendous gall or a complete lack of self-awareness. He arrived on a Tuesday evening, pulling up in my driveway in the Tesla that I was apparently paying for. I had set up a small digital recorder in my living room, hidden but able to capture our conversation clearly. "Jack," he greeted me with his usual backslapping enthusiasm. "What's this big investment opportunity you wanted to discuss?" "Have a seat, Bradley," I said, gesturing to the armchair across from mine. "Would you like a drink?" "I wouldn't say no to a scotch if you're offering," he said with a wink. I poured him the fingers of my good scotch, no reason not to let him. Her immediately, I needed to be sure of the facts first. I told her, and I wanted to give Bradley a chance to make things right without destroying your family. "Was that wrong?" "No," she said after consideration. "It was merciful, more merciful than I might have been in your place." 6 months later, my credit had been restored. Bradley had stuck to our agreement, perhaps realizing it was his best option for maintaining any relationship with his children. He'd found a job with a property management company not as glamorous as being a real estate agent, but steady work that would allow him to pay off his debts. Ellie had filed for divorce, but agreed to a reasonable custody arrangement. She was seeing a therapist to process the betrayal and focusing on her teaching career and the children. She'd moved in with me temporarily while she sorted out her finances, and it had been unexpectedly rewarding to have my daughter and grandchildren filling the house with life again. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Emma and James play in the yard, Ellie turned to me. "I've been thinking about what you did, Dad, how you handled everything." "Oh," I said, unsure where she was going with this. "You could have had Bradley arrested. You could have publicly humiliated him. You had every right to be vindictive after what he did to you. That wouldn't have helped anyone," I said, "especially not you and the kids." "But it was more than that," she insisted. You found a way to get justice without seeking revenge. You made him face consequences without destroying him. You protected all of us, even Bradley. In a way, I considered her words. I've lived long enough to know that revenge rarely brings the satisfaction people think it will. Justice, accountability, making things right, those are what matter in the end. She leaned her head against my shoulder, the way she used to when she was a little girl. Mom would be proud of how you handled this. The mention of Martha brought a lump to my throat. She always was the wise one in our marriage. I just try to think about what she would have done. Well, you did good, Dad. Really good. As the sun set behind the maple trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since the day I'd opened that lone statement. My name was cleared, my daughter was finding her strength, and my grandchildren were playing happily in the yard of the home I'd worked all my life to provide. It wasn't the family story I would have chosen, but we were writing a new chapter. Now, one based on truth and integrity. Bradley had tried to steal my identity, but in fighting to reclaim it, I had rediscovered who I truly was, not just a name on a credit report or a signature on a loan document, but a father who would do whatever it took to protect his family, even from one of their own. Some lessons come at a heavy price, but if we learn from them, even the most painful experiences can lead to growth and wisdom. As for Bradley, I find myself in a strange place emotionally. The raw anger has subsided, replaced by something more complex. I wouldn't say I've forgiven him entirely, but I understand him better now. He made terrible choices driven by desperation and an addiction to appearances. But he's facing those demons daily. The facade has crumbled, and in its place, a more authentic man is slowly emerging. Whether he and Ellie can ever rebuild what they had remains to be seen. But I've made peace with my role in all of this. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is to hold them accountable while leaving the door open for redemption. The months following our confrontation brought unexpected developments. Bradley's journey from resentment to genuine remorse wasn't straightforward, but it was profound, and my own path led me to discoveries about myself I never anticipated. Life has a way of teaching its most valuable lessons through its harshest trials. 3 weeks after Bradley moved out, I received a call from him. His voice sounded different, stripped of that artificial confidence that had always grated on me. "Jack," he said, "I need to talk to you. In person, would that be possible?" I hesitated, wondering what new angle he might be working, but something in his tone seemed genuine. "All right, my house, tomorrow afternoon." When he arrived, I barely recognized him. Gone was the designer polo and expensive watch. His hair was uncombed, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He declined my offer of Scott's, the first time I'd ever seen him refuse a drink. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, sitting stiffly on the edge of my sofa, "about what I did to you, to Ellie, and the kids." He paused, struggling visibly. "I've never really apologized. Not properly. I was too busy justifying, making excuses." I nodded but remained silent, giving him space to continue. "The thing is, Jack, what I did to you, it wasn't just about the money or the car. It was," he took a deep breath, "it was a pattern. My whole life has been built on appearances, on looking successful even when I wasn't, on taking shortcuts instead of doing the hard work." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, not unkindly, "because you're the first person who's ever really held me accountable. My parents bailed me out whenever I got in trouble. Previous relationships ended before the women discovered who I really was. Even in business, I always found ways to slide by." His hands trembled slightly. "You could have destroyed me, and you had every right to. Instead, you gave me a path to make things right. I didn't understand that at first. I was too angry, and now I'm starting therapy. For real, not just because it's part of our agreement. And I've joined a support group for people with compulsive spending and financial issues." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Jack. I just wanted you to know that what you did, it might have saved me from myself." I studied him for a long moment. The Bradley I'd known would never have admitted weakness or sought help. This vulnerability was entirely new. "I appreciate you telling me this," I said finally. "Recovery isn't a straight line, Bradley. There will be setbacks. The important thing is that you keep moving forward." He nodded, blinking rapidly. "There's one more thing. The Honda you've seen me driving. I didn't buy it. Ellie's letting me use her old car while I get back on my feet. I'm taking the bus to work most days, saving every penny to pay back what I owe. This small confession, more than any of his grand statements, told me he might genuinely be changing. As spring turned to summer, Ellie and the children continued living with me. My daughter was rebuilding her life with remarkable strength. She'd started taking online classes toward a school administration credential that would eventually increase her salary. In the evenings, after the kids were asleep, we'd sometimes sit on the porch and talk in a way we hadn't since she was a teenager. I keep thinking about how I missed all the signs with Bradley. She said one night, the fireflies blinking in the yard like earthbound stars. The way he'd get defensive about money questions, how he always had to have the newest, best things but was vague about how we could afford them. Don't blame yourself, I said. Con men are good at what they do because they make you want to believe them. She was quiet for a moment. Did you ever suspect, before all this happened? I considered my answer carefully. I had concerns about his priorities, the focus on status, on appearances. But no, I never imagined he would cross this line. I reached over to squeeze her hand. You know, your mother would have seen through him sooner than I did. She always had better instincts about people. Ellie smiled sadly. I miss her, especially now. She would have known exactly what to say to make this all hurt less. She would have told you that you're stronger than you think, that this is a chapter in your story, not the whole book. Is that what she told you after she got sick? I nodded, my throat tightening at the memory. She made me promise not to let grief define the rest of my life, said I had too much love left to give. Ellie leaned her head against my shoulder. She was right. Look at you now, Dad, taking in your daughter and grandkids, handling this whole mess with such dignity. The word caught me by surprise. Dignity. It wasn't something I'd thought about consciously, but it had guided my actions throughout this ordeal. The desire to handle this situation in a way that would honor Martha's memory, that would set an example for my grandchildren even if they were too young to understand it now. July brought unexpected news. Bradley had been offered a promotion at the property management company, not because of charm or empty promises, but because of his consistent work ethic over the previous months. His boss had called it a remarkable turnaround. Ella shared this information with mixed emotions during one of their co-parenting discussions. She was glad for the children's sake that their father was finding stability, but the wounds of his betrayal were still fresh. He asked if we could try counseling. She told me, folding laundry at my kitchen table, not to get back together necessarily, but to find a healthier way forward as parents. What did you tell him? I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral. That I'd think about it. She smoothed a tiny t-shirt with unnecessary precision. Part of me wants to just cut him out completely, you know, start fresh. But then I see how Emma lights up when he comes to pick them up for his weekends. How good he's been about sticking to a routine with them. There's no rush to decide, I said. Trust takes a long time to rebuild once it's broken, if it could be rebuilt at all. She added quietly, in August, Richard invited me fishing at his cabin on Lake Winnipesaukee. I was reluctant to leave Ellie and the kids, but she insisted I go, saying they'd be fine for a weekend. The lake was peaceful, the fishing mediocre, but the conversations with my old friend were exactly what I needed. On our second night, sitting on his deck with the moonlight silvering the water, Richard asked about Bradley. Seems like he's actually trying to make amends, I said, surprising myself with the assessment. Paying back the debt steadily, spending time with the kids, going to therapy. Not at all what I expected, to be honest. Richard nodded thoughtfully. People can change when their backs are against the wall. The question is whether it sticks when the pressure eases. That's what I wonder. Is this genuine growth, or just another performance until he can find an easier path? Time will tell, Richard said, lifting his glass in a small toast. But I've got to say, Jack, the way you handled this whole situation, it's been something to see. Most men would have gone straight for revenge. I thought about this as I cast my line into the dark water the next morning. Revenge had certainly tempted me in those first raw days of discovery. The hurt and betrayal had been so intense that I'd fantasized about seeing Bradley handcuffed, humiliated, his life destroyed as he'd nearly destroyed mine. But something had held me back some. Deeper wisdom that understood revenge would ultimately bring more pain, not less. It wasn't weakness that had led me to offer Bradley a path to redemption. It was strength. The strength to see beyond my own wounded pride to what would truly heal our broken family. By the time Labor Day arrived, bringing with it the first hints of autumn coolness, Ellie had made a decision. She and Bradley would proceed with the divorce, but she would attend co-parenting counseling with him. She'd also found a small rental house just a few blocks from my place close enough for easy visits, but giving her the independence she needed. "Are you sure you're ready?" I asked as we loaded boxes into my truck. "You and the kids are welcome to stay as long as you need." "I'm sure, Dad," she said, her expression more peaceful than I'd seen in months. "It's time for me to stand on my own feet again, but we'll still come for Sunday dinners. I promise." The rental was a cozy Cape Cod with a fenced backyard for the children to play in. As we unloaded furniture and arranged rooms, I found myself thinking about new beginnings. Ellie was starting fresh, creating a home that was entirely her own for the first time since college. Bradley arrived that afternoon to help with the heavier items and to set up the children's beds. It was the first time the three of us had worked together since the confrontation, and the atmosphere was understandably tense at first, but gradually focused on the practical task of getting Ellie and the kids settled. We found a rhythm. At one point, as Bradley and I maneuvered a bookcase through a narrow hallway, he paused and said quietly, "Thank you, Jack, for being here for them when I failed them." The simple acknowledgement caught me off guard. "They're my family, too," I said after a moment. "That doesn't change, no matter what." Something passed between us then, not forgiveness exactly, but a mutual recognition. We were both committed to the well-being of these children, to Ellie's healing. Whatever had happened between us, that shared priority remained. Later, after Bradley had left and the kids were asleep in their new rooms, Ellie and I sat on her small front porch with cups of tea. "So," she said, "what now for you? I mean, you've spent months helping me put my life back together. What about yours?" The question startled me. I'd been so focused on the crisis, on supporting Ellie and managing the situation with Bradley, that I hadn't thought much about my own future. "I haven't really considered it," I admitted. "Go back to my quiet retirement, I suppose. Maybe do some more fishing with Richard." She studied me over the rim of her mug. "You know, Dad, you've been different these past months, more engaged, like you've found a purpose again." I hadn't noticed the change in myself, but as she said it, I recognized the truth in her words. The crisis had pulled me out of the comfortable, but somewhat empty, routine I'd settled into after Martha died. It had forced me to draw on strengths I hadn't used in years, to reconnect with people, to fight for something that mattered. "Maybe you're right," I said slowly, "but I'm not sure what that means for the future." "It could mean anything you want it to," she said with a smile. "You've still got a lot of life ahead of you, Dad." Her words echoed in my mind over the following weeks as I adjusted to having my house to myself again. The silence, which had once been a comfortable companion, now felt emptier somehow. I found myself looking for ways to fill my days with more than television and yard work. I started volunteering at the local senior center, helping other retirees navigate financial paperwork and understand their benefits, putting my hard-won knowledge of credit reports and loan documents to good use. I joined a community woodworking class, rediscovering a hobby I'd enjoyed in my younger years. I even accepted an invitation to a dinner party from my neighbor Helen, a widow about my age who had always been kind but whom I kept at a polite distance. October brought brilliant foliage and a significant milestone. Bradley made the final payment on the fraudulent debts. He'd worked overtime, sold his expensive watch and golf clubs, and lived frugally to make it happen months ahead of schedule. He asked to meet me at a coffee shop to deliver the news in person. As we sat across from each other, steaming mugs between us, I realized how much he had changed from the slick, overconfident man who had laughed in my face less than a year ago. His clothes were simple now, his manner quieter, more thoughtful. "I want you to know that I'm continuing the financial counseling, even though the payments are complete," he said. "And the therapy, too. It's not just about the money, it never was, really. It was about who I was trying to be, who I thought I needed to be." "And who are you trying to be now?" I asked. He considered the question seriously. "Honest," he said finally, "with myself first of all, and a father my kids can respect. Even if I've made mistakes they'll eventually learn about." I nodded, recognizing the authentic struggle in his words. "That's a worthy goal. I don't expect you to ever fully trust me again, Jack, or even like me. But I hope someday you might be able to see that this," he gestured between us, encompassing the whole difficult history, changed me for the better. As I drove home, I thought about transformation, how crisis can either break us or remake us into something stronger. Bradley was being remade, it seemed. So was Ellie, finding independence and confidence she hadn't known she possessed, and perhaps in a quieter way. So was I that evening. I found myself opening the cedar chest where I kept Martha's things. Among them was a journal she kept during her illness, which I had never had the heart to read. Now, feeling somehow ready, I carefully turned the pages, finding her thoughts during those final difficult months. One entry in particular caught my eye. Watching Jack struggle with what's coming breaks my heart. He's always been the protector, the provider, the one who fixes everything. I worry what will happen when I'm gone and there's nothing left for him to fix. My hope is that he'll discover the wisdom he's gained is meant to be shared, that his capacity for love isn't limited to me and Ellie. There's so much good he could still do in this world. I closed the journal, tears blurring my vision. Martha had known me better than I knew myself, had seen potential in me that I was only now beginning to recognize. Thanksgiving arrived with swirling snow and the promise of new traditions. Ellie had invited both Bradley and me to her new house for the holiday meal, a bold experiment in redefined family dynamics. I'd offered to bow out, to give them space to establish their co-parenting relationship. But she had insisted, the kids need to see that family can change shape without falling apart. She'd said, besides, it's your first Thanksgiving as a single dad too. We should be together. So I found myself carving a turkey at my daughter's table, while Bradley poured sparkling cider for the children and Helen, whom I'd invited on a whim. Much to Ellie's delight, brought in a homemade pumpkin pie. It wasn't the Thanksgiving I would have imagined a year ago. The journey from that October afternoon, when I'd opened the loan statement, to this moment had been painful, complicated, and ultimately transformative for all of us. We carried scars from the experience, certainly. Trust had been broken and was being rebuilt slowly, carefully, with clear-eyed awareness of our human capacity for both failure and growth. But as I looked around the table at Ellie, strong and independent, at Bradley, humbled and genuinely working to be better, at my grandchildren, secure in the knowledge that they were deeply loved, at Helen, whose friendship had unexpectedly brightened my days, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The Tesla was long gone. So was the illusion of the perfect family, the perfect retirement, the predictable path forward. In their place was something messier, but more authentic, a family, healing, imperfect, but resilient, a future unwritten, but full of possibilities, a life that had been disrupted, but ultimately enriched by facing hard truths with courage and compassion. I raised my glass in a toast. To second chances, I said simply, 2 second chances, they echoed, even Bradley, his eyes meeting mine with quiet understanding. Later, as the snow continued to fall outside, transforming the world into something new and clean, I found myself standing at Ellie's kitchen window. Helen joined me there, her shoulder lightly touching mine. "Penny, for your thoughts," she said. "I was just thinking about wealth," I replied. "Not the kind that shows up on bank statements or drives around in fancy cars, but the real kind, the kind that sustains you when everything else falls away." She nodded, understanding immediately. The wealth of knowing who you are, of having people who love you, not for what you can give them, but for who you are at your core. Exactly. In the living room, I could hear Bradley reading a story to the children, his voice rising and falling dramatically, drawing giggles from them. Ellie was curled up on the couch, watching them with a complex mixture of emotions on her face: lingering pain, cautious hope, fierce love for her children. The lessons I've learned through this ordeal are ones I'll carry with me through whatever years remain. That true wealth isn't measured in credit scores or Tesla cars, but in the integrity with which we live our lives. That justice without compassion is just another form of cruelty, and that family bonds, though they may bend under pressure, can emerge stronger when tested by fire. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to begin again, to find new purpose, to open yourself to possibilities you never imagined. At 6 to 7, I'm not the same man I was a year ago. The crisis that might have diminished me has instead expanded my understanding of myself and what matters most. As for what comes next for all of us, that story is still being written, one day at a time, with honesty and hard-won wisdom as our guides. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the